junctures from Liverpool, England.
People all over the world are just beginning to talk about the Beatles.
My model of business is the Beatles. You know, they were four very talented guys.
1, 2, 3.
Hello, my name's Paul McCartney.
This is Ringo Starr. This is John Lennon.
I'm George Harrison.
Welcome back to the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. I'm your host, Jack Lawless. Today we're sitting down with Kosh, the legendary art director and album cover designer who's designed the covers of iconic albums Abbey Road, Let It Be, Hotel California, Ringo the Fourth, Who's Next, James Taylor's Greatest Hits, and countless others. Today we're asking Kosh about his experience working with the Beatles during such an incredible time for music, and he's sharing stories like you've never heard before. So you can check out Kosh's projects and information all in the podcast description, and you should definitely follow him on social media. So, thanks for listening. Here's the episode. Hey, Kosh, thank you so much for coming on the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. How are you doing today?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much for having me. This is going to be a gas. Tell me what you want to know.
Kosh, you've had such an incredible career. How did you first become interested in designing and directing art?
Well, I guess it goes really back to art school, because in those days I had a choice of either joining the army and going and getting shot in Suez or going to art school. So I decided, obviously, to take the latter course. I was always interested in art, and anyway, there was a bonding between art and music that I started to notice. You know, some of the great school bands, you know, were coming out from art schools. I mean, actually, when I went to Hornsey Art, the Kinks were sort of like embroidering. And I mean, if you think about all these sort of areas of London and England that spawned all these great bands, I mean, there's an awful lot of people went to art school. So it was a kind of connection between design and music, which was not being really handled very well by the labels at the time. You know, they were just sort of sticking pictures of Frank Sinatra on the cover, bang, selling records, you know. And it wasn't until later that we got involved that the all-powerful bands suddenly decided they wanted to have a hand in their image. And, you know, and my job was, of course, to sort of try and tell people what was in those days, the grooves when they were going to pick up the album. You know, is this a rock album? Is this a metal album? What is this album? You know, what is it? And that's how it sort of developed, I guess. And it was just through a love of music. Dad actually sort of ran a jukebox shop, but sort of, you know, repair and importing and putting them out to American air bases. So I was actually, while playing amongst jukeboxes, I was also finding stacks and stacks of 45s, you know, with all the great R&B stuff that was coming in from the States for the American servicemen. So I'm listening to all this great stuff, you know, Chuck Berry, and you just name it, and I'm there. And that's this sort of just seeped into my brain. And from that point on, I was like, you know, I decided that I've got to do something in music. And I wasn't a very good musician. I wanted to be a bass player, but, you know, my fingers squeaked too much. And anyway, I ended up going to art college and not graduating and ending up at the Royal Opera House designing for them. And then through a magazine called Art and Artists, we found ourselves working, you know, for the cream of the sort of British painters and sculptures and conceptual artists such as Yoko Ono. I got the phone call one night and there I was suddenly working for John and Yoko.
Wow.
It's called being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. Wow. So was there ever an artist or a specific album that inspired you to design albums the way that you do?
Well, I think I was inspired by Blue Note Records because they were having, I think in those days, they were very, very avant-garde covers were coming out, and Andy Warhol was in charge of them at the time, I believe. And so, yeah, and I was kind of lurking around with jazz. But I think that's where I got the design inspiration from. But then, of course, I'm listening to, great music coming in, and images form in your head, as you're driving and whatever else. And so it just, and then find yourself working for John and Yoko. Now I'm at Apple. And there's this stuff going around. It's just a sort of maelstrom of everything coming together with incredibly tight deadlines. And we never blew a deadline once, despite what you may hear about how slack the place was. It wasn't.
Oh man, I just can't even imagine what it was like to be working in that scene at that time when so many different things were happening. And like, even before Yoko Ono and the avant-garde, when the Beatles came out, what were your thoughts when you heard their music for the first time?
My thoughts were, oh dear, this is interesting, because we had our own local bands, little bands called the Rolling Stones and things like this, coming from London, and the I think the Mersey beat, the invasion, the Liverpool invasion, was like, my God, this is different. This is something happening. Of course, we were very young, hormones are racing, girlfriends and whatever else. So it all kind of get tied up in a sort of romantic sort of madness, I guess, at the time. But yeah, we know it's something was happening. And it was, because the pirate stations were going around the country, and they were playing great stuff. Radio Hilversum was coming in from Amsterdam. And you might not understand a word of Dutch, but you can certainly just hear the music, So I guess it just happened. It just overtook us. And then, of course, the British invasion took place in the States. And it seemed to me that, particularly with bands like the Stones, we were sort of telling America, look, you missed all this shit once. Get it together now. Listen, this is your music. And I guess that's sort of through it all, Next question. Run out.
So how did you come into contact with the Beatles for the first time?
Oh, I was working for this magazine called Art and Artists, and I was fielding the telephones, or telephone, I might add, for the office, while Mario Amaya, who was the curator of the Museum of Modern Art in Toronto, ran the magazine, decided it was his turn to conduct the Venice Biennale. And so he left town and left me in charge. And I've got all these amazing artists, Hockney. I mean, people just kept phoning me. It's sort of, you took the job home with you somehow. And I remember one evening the phone rang, and it was this very, very Liverpudlian accent saying, "This is Mr. Lennon. Can I speak to Mr. Kosh?" And I totally thought it was a put on, it was a joke, But he wanted me to come to the Hammersmith Hospital to see him, and I'm beginning to think this might not be a joke. And I arrived there and sort of went out to this, asked for Mr. Winston, went up to the top floor, pressed the button, and Christ, it was John Lennon. It's like, oh my God. And Yoko was in the bed because she was, pregnant and having trouble. And he just said, "Come in, let's have a cup of tea." And that's from that point on, we hit it off, very well.
Wow.
And he liked the way of designing in the magazine. That was why, because I had a minimalist style. So I like to play with space, and he liked that. Yoko liked that particularly. So that's really how it got into the fact that, on my third visit, I think he said, "Well, why don't you find yourself a desk at Apple?" Which was not the easiest thing in the world, because it was just like a madhouse in there. It was just, rushing around all over the place. And if you find a desk, you might not have it the next day. You had to keep shuffling your stuff around. It's easier to work it out.
Yeah.
But there's Beatles running up and down the stairs, and it was great fun, great fun. Hard work, but great fun.
And so after you met John, what was it like working on that first project that you did for John and Yoko?
That would have been, was that it would have been the War Is Over campaign, which we started out that as a Christmas card. It was going to be War Is Over if you want it. Happy Christmas, John and Yoko. And I think it was a dear friend of mine who actually worked for Rolling Stone at the time, Richard York, who said, "Well, why didn't you turn it into a campaign?" So then all of a sudden we're designing posters and billboards and the stuff going up in, Amsterdam, London, New York. And we were translating it into various languages, and it just took off. And John and Yoko were happily planting acorns for peace and whatever else, and doing their baggings and things. And I was building their wedding album, and everything was in black and white, if you've probably noticed. So
Yeah, and that is such an iconic campaign. I mean, even in hindsight, you see the war is over letters and you immediately know what that is and associate it with John and Yoko and that whole war is over campaign. How did you even start planning to create something that is just so memorable and so iconic?
It had to be minimal. It had to be seen from miles away. I mean, I try. I always decided that if you're going to design something that you want people to take notice of, you have to put it on the side of a bus, and as it goes by, you can read it. And I mean that's how I started. And the black and white. I mean, there was a poster in. I mean, there was some placards at the end of World War II, and there's a woman holding up a sign. So the Japanese had just surrendered, and it said "War is over." And it was. I thought, wait a minute, this is it. This time it really was over. So I sort of worked on that and chose a very, very American typeface, which is called Franklin Gothic, and it just became an icon. I didn't expect it to, of course, but it did, and they're still using it now. It's in the Museum of Modern Art and the Tate in London. So I mean, I
Wow.
guess we hit that one.
Yeah. It's just so incredible how iconic that is, as is all of your other art as well. Now, when you were working with John, do you feel like you had the best working relationship with him out of all of the Beatles?
Yes. Yeah, they're very, very easy to work with. I mean, Ringo was George is a sweetheart, was a sweetheart. John had this acerbic wit that he enjoyed. We enjoyed each other, and we assembled the John Lennon diary where we had to go on our hands and knees to write out every page. I don't know if you've ever seen the John Lennon diary, but it's kind of rude. But the fun we had doing it because when we finished, neither one of us could stand up, and of course that it's my fault. No, it's his fault. It was kind of crazy, and we did some things that never saw the light of day. We were planning on a series of topical singles that would come out every week. Now there was a problem with that because nowadays it'd be no problem whatsoever to put out a single every week. But in those days you had to sort of record it, you had to stamp it, you had to press it, you had to put it in a cover, you had to get it to the stores. By the time it comes out, it's no longer topical. So that went down the tubes. But and I think I was going to do all the black and white sleeves, and I know it just fell apart, but it was a great idea, I thought at the time.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, that would have been really cool and pioneering because now, especially with Spotify, people come out with singles every week.
Yeah, exactly. But Phil Spector was going to produce it, and it was like, there's Phil Spector's another story which we won't touch, but nonetheless.
Now, you also designed the cover of Abbey Road, which
Yes.
is the most iconic album cover of all time. Can you tell us the story behind that?
Yeah, I mean, and to be honest, and my dear friend Ian McMillan, who was the photographer, and I were not happy with it. We thought, is this good enough for the Beatles? And it was a roll of 12 shots, and one came across where they were not sort of picking their noses or doing something silly. Well, you've probably seen the whole 12. And even though Paul is out of step, that seemed to be the only one that sort of worked, to do the structure that we wanted there in doing what it is. And it was one of those jobs that you got the brief on Wednesday, and we had to get the art to not Capital in America, but in England it was EMI, on Friday. So it was a huge rush. Anyway, it was thrown together, and no one thought it was going to be an icon at the time. It was just like, is this good enough? Well, it turned out to possibly be the most famous cover I've ever done.
Yeah. And were the Beatles involved in that process too? Were they happy with the cover?
I presume they were happy with the cover. I know Paul was happy with the cover, though he claims it's totally his idea. But yeah, George was involved in sort of looking at the shots. But Ian and Macmillan and myself were the ones who chose the photograph in the end. My biggest sort of almost nightmare was I decided it was not necessary to put the name of the Beatles on the cover, because if you didn't know who they were, you lived in a cave. And that got me into some trouble because I had that one night we were on press, and I got a phone call from the head of EMI, and he was livid with me. He had his very, very posh accent, but his language was atrocious and just horrifying, and just tore into me saying, "We're never going to sell any records. You couldn't put it." And I was very upset. I didn't sleep that night, and I sort of went into the office in the morning. And George was there, which is really kind of strange. What's George doing there at 10 o'clock in the morning? You know? And I was nervous, and I said to him, "Look, this is what happened." He said, "Oh, screw him with the Beatles." They sold 26 million in 2 days or something. Oh, it wasn't 12 shots. I think it was 6 shots altogether. But so you can see how, you know, the roll should have been 12, but I think it was like 5 blank ones or something like it.
You know, I just think it's so crazy that they wanted to put the Beatles' name on the Abbey Road album cover. I mean, where would you even put it on there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I would have found something. A picture would have been adapted, or I'd have worked on it. And the only work on that picture was the fact I didn't think the sky looked very good. We just put some more blue into it. Yeah, I don't know where I would have put it, to be honest. Looking back now, because I, to be, you know, I think I would have probably designed something totally different if I had the time. You know, and but seeing as, in my opinion, it was the best Beatles album anyway, in my opinion. And the fact that it just took off in such a way, it became an icon. I mean, it could have been a paper bag, I think, and it would have been an icon. You
Yeah.
know? Didn't they? Right. Yes.
Now, what was your process like when you were working on the Let It Be album cover as opposed to Abbey Road? Was it any different for you?
Well, Let It Be actually came before Abbey Road. I was working on that. And what happened was Let It Be, which was called Get Back at the time, we started on that. And then it was shelved for Abbey Road. And the idea was for the Let It Be album was it was the Black album to follow the White album and to be their swan song. Well, because Abbey Road got in the way and took the Let It Be slot. And we got moved over. So that gave me time to work on the book. And if you notice, if you get the package, which has the book in it, the book is still called Get Back, and the album's called Let It Be. But 500,000 books, you're not going to throw them away, you know. So anyway, that was the problem. The problem was I could not get all 4 Beatles in one room anyway, if we wanted to do a group shot, because I think Ringo was making The Magic Christian with Peter Sellers, I believe, or he was off making movies. George was sulking and left. And Paul was, I think, in Scotland doing something. So I had to use Ethan Russell's snaps, if you like. I'm sure he's not going to like that word. Shots from, you know, the sessions at Twickenham and downstairs in the Apple studio. And I had to sort of try and balance 4 headshots. So I still managed to keep the whole black theme going, and, you know. So it was a very, very simple cover. And it, you know, it did its job. I think it served it, you know. And, now, what with the resurgence of the, you know, the movie, I think it's probably going to pick up again. You know, it was everyone was disappointed with it, but now actually having listened to it several times, 20 years later, 30, 40 years later, yeah, it's pretty good. It's got some really good stuff in there. It really moves, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that album. And like you said, it was supposed to be their swan song. So I'm wondering, did you notice any difference in the way that the Beatles were working with each other while that album was coming out? Or did you ever have to make a decision between two Beatles creative input?
Well, not really. I mean, I was firmly, obviously, in the John Lennon camp. You know, I mean, I have to tell you that in the background, and there was a difference between what was received by the public and what was really going on. And I can give you an example. I was designed a single sleeve for the Ballad of John and Yoko, and to present the image, I went to Abbey Road Studios to find there was Paul sitting on Ringo's drum kit, and there's John with the 12 string, okay, playing and working around. And then they swapped over. Paul went on to bass and John went on to lead. And that was the Ballad of John and Yoko. They were getting on fine. They're not supposed to be talking to each other. They're supposed to be estranged. The double entendres were flying all over the place. And it seemed to be very easy and very fun, and nothing like what we were supposed to sort of perceive in public, which was they were at each other's throats. Well, I think the lawyers were at each other's throats.
Yeah.
But I'll give you some idea. And the single comes out and it says the Beatles on it, you know, and it's just John and Paul. It was, you know, I mean, it's just like the old days. I thought, well, you know. But there was also strange things were going on at the time, because remember, Paul was supposed to be dead.
Oh, that's right.
Which was a lot of fun we had with that. Because Derek Taylor, who was the press officer and sort of ran tight ship, he would say to us, "No, you don't confirm or deny Paul's death. You just say it looks like him or something like that. You know, so it looks like Paul, it must be. You know, there'll be more millions of records.
Now, did you guys have any idea that the Abbey Road album cover would lead to so many conspiracy theories about Paul being dead?
No, it was all. There's another. As I said, it was serendipitous. There was the Volkswagen, the 28 if license plate, and whatever other clues. You know, the fact he got bare feet. Because I mean, if he actually says he kicked the shoes off because they were too tight. He had sandals on, and the pavement was hot. Well, actually, I don't think it was, but still. But things keep changing. Like sometimes he's got a cigarette in his hand, sometimes he hasn't. So it's just things evolve. We had no idea that was going to happen, not at all. But it was stirred up by the fifth Beatles, as they called themselves over here, the DJs.
So at that point in your career, you've designed Let It Be, you've designed Abbey Road, two of the most iconic album covers in the world. Then you go on to work for John and Yoko in their solo career, make another iconic campaign. Can you tell us about what it was like to work for John and Yoko in their solo years? Was it any different than working for the Beatles?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of difficult. I mean, I could just walk in and out, and they trusted me to just get on with it. If I designed their calendar and it's all in minimal black and white. One of the reasons my minimalism, if that's such a word, is the fact that I was not very good at psychedelia, which was rampant at the time. So it took a few years to get into that, and then it was too late. So yeah, I mean, they seemed they liked the way I was working and whatever else. So. John was a tough one at sometimes. I mean, he didn't suffer falls gladly. He had a very strong wit, and he could be devastating. Not to me. I mean, he wasn't the angel that we make him out to be all the time. But as far as I was concerned, I just thought he's one of the gods. One of the Fab Four too. Christ, you're working for the best band in the world.
Yeah.
If you discount the Rolling Stones, of
course. Yeah.
Just want to start controversy there.
Yeah. So in hindsight, do you have a favorite design that you've done for John Lennon in your career?
I don't know. I mean, I think it has to be the wedding album. I think because of all the love and everything that went in there and how it was all put together. And I mean, I had plenty of time to do that one. Sometimes you get deadlines which are impossible, and sometimes they drag on. And if they drag on, you can overwork things. But I managed to keep it very pure and simple, I think. And it's I mean, it didn't quite survive as we'd like to. I mean, I was supposed to set up a picture of a photograph of the wedding cake. There's supposed to be a wedding cake in there. It's a slice of wedding cake, which, as you know, with English cake, they last for years, and you re-gift them down the line. Every Christmas you get a piece of fruit cake. So we thought that was practical, but it wasn't. A wedding cake in a box.
Yeah.
So I think that for working for John Yoko, that's the piece I love the most. Yeah, I must admit. With the wedding certificate inside and everything, which is where I struck my name in there. Pop that in the wedding. Certificate. And it's fabricated nicely, as opposed to Let It Be, which the book tends to fall to pieces because it wasn't glued properly and things like this. And one of my jobs is to keep an eye on, sort of go around the press units and make sure the colours are right and make sure the stitching's right and all this sort of stuff. And somehow or other, we got conned into the Get Back glue. Perfect binding, we call it, which is in fact imperfect. But years later, of course, they perfected it. So. Yeah, but you saw the box, didn't you? I mean, the box itself is very flimsy. They go for like $7,000 now. Those things.
Yeah. Gosh, earlier you mentioned working with Phil Spector on the War Is Over campaign. What was working with Phil Spector like for you?
Oh dear. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. It was mildly threatening, I think. It was, you walk into and to go and see Phil, you had to be frisked to make sure you weren't carrying heat.
Wow.
You have to sort of make sure that he's nowhere near a window in case there's an assassin on the other roof going to shoot him,
Wow.
Which is all It was all in his mind, of course, you know. Yeah, and he was supercilious. I mean, he wasn't easy to work with, I must admit, you know. But John loved him. I mean, it's amazing. But then again, I mean, look, the wall of sound. I mean, as a creator, listen to that music. And of course, I got involved in the Back to Mono campaign. If you listen to the Phil Spector Christmas album, which was re-released on Apple in mono, it's stunning.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
You know, I'm not a Christmas record fan, you know, but this is a pretty amazing piece of work. So I had to, you know, you have to sort of bow down to the fact the man was a genius, but yeah, definitely mildly threatening genius.
That's
mean,
just crazy to me. How could anyone work in an environment like that?
I know. I have no idea. I mean, I did, but you know, it's just like I had to fly to New York, you know, from London to meet him. I'm thinking, oh God, have I got to go through this again? It was all right, it was, you know. But Alan Klein kept him in control too somehow. Yeah, with Abco management, became the manager of the three of the Fabs, you know.
And you've also had experience designing album covers for Ringo as well. What was your experience like working with Ringo Starr as opposed to John?
Oh, he's a very sweet man, actually. I liked him a lot. We did the first one I did for him was the country album, the Bucco Blues, and that was fun to work with him on that. And it was kind of working a little bit by remote. You know, you just pop in and look at it and whatever else and say, well, I like that picture, I don't like that picture. And that was more or less it. And it wasn't until I came to the States that we worked on Road to Reviewer that we had some fun. And I gave him a box of props, and one of them was that magnifying glass, you know, so he got his eye. And he liked the title Rotogravure. He didn't know what it meant. It's a method of printing, you know, but it took his fancy. And we got it, so the first release had a magnifying glass in it, you know, and whatever else, so you could read the credits on the back, which are very tiny on that burnt out door, which was the Apple door after they'd left and the kids had got into it. So he was a different guy when he came to America, I thought, you know, because he was looking for a label. I did two, Bad Boy, and I did Record of Fools. I did one more, I think. But yeah, he was fun to work with. I liked him a lot. Yeah, very unpretentious. They all were actually in their respect, you know. Paul was very kind of cute, you know, thumbs up stuff, you know. George was very nice. He called me Johnny, which irritated me. Like, hey, Johnny, let's get, you know, let's go. Johnny Hare Krishna. Thank you. Nice man. Nice man.
And then at that point in your career, you decided to move from England to LA, where you started to design even more iconic album covers. What made you decide that you wanted to start working near the canyon instead?
I think it was a combination of various things. I mean, the tax man was coming after me a little bit heavily in London because you can have a great year, then you have a bad year, and you've got to pay your taxes in the bad year, you know. And my clients were coming over. Rod Stewart was coming over. Ringo had come over, and I made the mistake of coming over here on a vacation. Okay, and I'm in paradise and thinking that's it. You know, I'm not going back to the rain and the mushrooms growing out of your toes. You know, and that's what brought me over. And because there were these. We were in the Golden Triangle recording studios. Now it was like the great recording studios had moved sort of from New York to LA, and they were, you know, and stars. I mean, actual stars and artists were coming in to LA specifically to work in these great studios. And because I'm getting dragged into that, you know, the sound factories, well, you know, the whole list. And of course, Peter Asher had come over, and he would from Apple, and he was managing Linda Ronstadt, which introduced me to her, and we got on like house on fire. We had lots of fun together, and that led to, I guess, the next was it Eagles next, and Irving Azoff most likely, and James Taylor. So it's all that West Coast soft rock stuff, which was, you know, it was swirling around, and I just got sucked up into it and enjoyed every moment, you know. And Linda Ronstadt is still a dear pal, you know. So it's we just build these relationships, I guess. You know? So that's how I got here. And once I was here, I decided I'm staying. You know, you know what the Englishman's like about in the midday sun. You know.
Yeah. So, I definitely wasn't around at the time, and I wasn't in LA either, but I've seen the documentaries about LA during that time, and everything I read and I watch, I understand that LA had such a communal feel among the musicians that were there. Is that your experience with living and working in LA as well?
Yeah, I mean, the Laurel Canyon scene had just about sort of dissolved into the rest of the town. But yes, it was. There were certain places you go to, like Lucy's El Adobe, a restaurant, and there'd be half of the Eagles in there, and Linda and people, and the governor Brown and whatever else. And so that sort of sprung up, and all the session men will be in and out and stuff, and you get to know them all, and the background singers, and they're all so. It was kind of tight knit, yeah, but it wasn't. I had a little bit of trouble bursting into the clique of designers here because I was this kid from London who happened to do the Beatles, So, and that was a little tough to break in. So I decided not to approach the labels, but to go for management, and that's where I found myself, picking up the artists. And once they understood that I was working for them and not the label, and that they would get what they want as opposed to what the label wanted, that's when it became obvious that they didn't need the record companies, to do their design work. It just needed someone who was independent. And, as long as it came in within budget and on time, and we did. We always came in on time and under budget, maybe by only like $1. Had to cook the books a bit, maybe.
Yeah. That's amazing.
But budgets in those days were fantastic, because you could sell. You could spend the Eagles cover cost like 40 grand by the time it's all put together and finished, and And that sounds like an awful lot of money today, but and in today those money. But if you consider that they're going to sell like 6 million albums in 3 days at sort of $6 a pop, 40 grand's nothing, nothing. Nowadays, of course, you're lucky to get 5 grand out of anything, So we've moved on.
Speaking of working with the Eagles, you also designed probably the second most iconic album cover in history, which is Hotel California. Can you tell us what it was like working for the Eagles during that time? And was it any similar to working with the Beatles, working on both of their, arguably they're both their magnum opuses?
Oh, totally different. I mean, to be honest, Henley and Fry were sort of totally in control. Henley particularly, because he's a bit of a control freak. He won't deny that. And so what you do with a band like that is you have to sort of blow them out the water first thing. So with Hotel California, which was not a serendipitous cover, it was carefully worked out and planned. We shot, I think, 3 different locations. And obviously the one that we were using, the one with the golden sunset, I decided that if I'm going to show this to the band, I'm not going to show them a transparency and through a viewer. I'm going to show them a sort of Cibachrome, which is a very, very expensive print, about the size of their table. So when they walk in and go, oh, and that's how I did that. And the band, Randy Meisner was very sweet. Don Feld was a really nice guy to work with. But mainly I was working with Henley and Fry. And Fry was great. I mean, when Henley got a little bit too important, he would, kind of make faces behind his back and things. So you could work with those cats, you really could.
Now, as the 70s were going on and other artists started blossoming, like the Eagles and James Taylor, what was your relationship like with the Beatles when they were in their solo careers? Did you keep in contact with them other than, working on their albums?
No, not really. I used to get a Christmas card from John occasionally, and no, I didn't really. It was just, I mean, Paul did phone up, I think, in the early 80s because he had a special on Fox and wanted some titles. And he always used to use Hypnosis as his design group. And for some reason, they weren't available in LA, and I was, So I spoke to him on the phone. I guess that was in 1980 or something. That was the last time. It got nothing but good.
Now, Kosh, in hindsight, you've designed the most iconic album covers for the Beatles, the Eagles, Electric Light Orchestra. Do you have a favorite album cover or logo that you've designed?
I can give you a favorite album cover, and that'll be Linda Ronstadt's Simple Dreams, because I designed that specifically So everything had to be perfect. The typography, the photography, which was Jim Shade, of course. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go for a Grammy in this. I really am. It's very, I know it sounds very sort of, well, never mind. So I did, and we got a Grammy. And that, I think, is such a labour of love. And I put so much into that. That's my favourite, I think. As to logo, well, of course, the ELO logo, which was an homage to my dad and jukeboxes, really,
Oh, wow.
So those two things, I think, stand out. There's a lot of other things I've done which didn't see really, were on albums which didn't really do very well, so they never got noticed or seen. You kind of, if you get $1 million sort of seller, you're noticed. So you've got a better chance of selling a piece of work. But you still put everything into everything. Whatever you do, you've got to put everything into.
Yes. And that's the one thing that I see in your work consistently, is that it's always complete, to use that word, everything you do.
Yeah, that's the point. If you take the record out of its sleeve and the record's on the turntable, the label tells you where it came from, and the inner sleeve may be part of the story that's going on, I like to tell stories if I can, a before and after, which is the Hotel California. But there's always a little joke in there somewhere, do something. It might be something you won't see for years and think, wait a minute, what's that in the corner there?
So looking back on your years at Apple, do you have a favorite memory of working at Apple or working with the Beatles?
I think, yes. There was one time when I was up in Derek Taylor's office, which was on the 4th floor at this old rickety building. And I think I was doing a letterhead or something for him as a kind of gift, because he's such a nice man. And as I was leaving, he said, why don't you just sit down for a minute? And I thought, okay, why not? He said, just wait. And Ringo walked in, sat down, and I think a couple of other, I think Peter Brown arrived. So I thought, this is a hierarchy going on here, what's going on? And all of a sudden, the door burst open, and John came in holding 2 acetates in his hand and put one on the turntable. And he's got these massive speakers on either side. And it was Come Together, right, from the first track on Abbey Road. And we listened to the first side of Abbey Road all the way through to She's So Heavy, and I'm losing it, because I never heard it. We were the first 6 people, I think, who weren't actually Beatles to have actually heard the record, apart from Jeff Emerick and and that was a magic moment, because I thought, my God, this is such an album, and we hadn't been smoking yet.
Wow.
Thereafter, though, that's right.
Oh my gosh, what a moment. That's crazy. When
Yeah.
you were in that room, when John played that record for you, I'm sure you knew that was going to be a special album.
Yes. Yeah, it never had been pressed. It was just the first acetate that had come off the lathe downstairs. And the trouble with acetates is you can only play them like 2 or 3 times and they're gone.
Yeah.
You can't even steal it.
Yeah.
Not you could.
Imagine
Let that out, bro. Well, of course, the other thing was the rooftop concert. I mean, that's I was up there, and that was something.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I'm sure, did you get to watch the recent Get Back documentary?
Oh yeah.
I mean, what was it like to experience that and then watch that experience all over again?
Well, it was bitterly cold. I mean, I've been up there and looked at this. What we didn't realise at the time is, despite the reinforcing of the roof, what with Billy's organ and whatever else, that roof could have collapsed, and we could have gone down to the next floor, to the next floor, to the next floor, because the building wasn't designed for that sort of weight and all those people, because they were streaming in from everywhere, and there was the camera crew, and there was Billy and his stuff, and the various looky-loos that had come up from below. And I actually had a note to give to Kevin Harrington, who was the roadie, in my opinion, there, and a dear friend, which I never managed to deliver it to him. So I just hid behind the chimney pots. And there's one photograph where you can see me doing that. My job is to always keep out of the camera, never get in front of the camera.
Right.
Idiot. So anyway, yeah, that was a magic moment too. But but it was so damn cold up there. I remember, I wasn't dressed properly. I just had a shirt on or something. It was like February, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah, yeah.
And so that was they were good times, good times. But you don't realise at the time what's going on until later. You suddenly suss out, well, my God, I was up there. It just becomes. All I was trying to do was deliver a note. I didn't realise I'd get trapped up there. But now and the sound up there was like, deafening. It wasn't being nicely mixed down in the basement. I was sat under a high hat with the Who. That's what it's like.
Yeah. And when the police showed up, I mean, what was that like for you? I mean, that must have been a little scary.
Yeah, it was because to be honest, I didn't have a really good view of it because I was on the one end and they came up the rickety stairway to the top there, and I didn't really know what was going on. I mean, I'd heard some bullhorns down below about going on, and I couldn't see the road and see where the police cars had arrived. To be honest, I think the police had walked up from the local police station, which was it was in Savile Row, in the same street. And someone told me that there had been a phone call to warn us by us, I mean, I guess Terry, who was on the door, that there was going to be a raid. So there was a massive flushing of toilets, could you imagine, sort of going on. But don't get me wrong. I think for one moment that Apple was a place of degenerate sort of hooliganism. It wasn't. It was actually a hard-working, serious place, which you could enjoy when you had to do it. Anyway, you turn up at 10 o'clock in the morning and you'd be there at 10 o'clock at night. It was like a greater place to work.
And do you remember did you guys celebrate after the rooftop concert? Did you go out to lunch? What did you guys do after?
Yeah, they went down to listen to the playbacks. I wasn't. I think I just went. I mean, I only lived up the street myself, so I could just walk home. And as I say, I borrowed somebody's overcoat because it was so cold, as far as I know. And then said, "Oh yeah, I just realised I saw the Beatles last concert." Then it dawned on me.
Wow. Wow.
Takes a while to sink in.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. It's so cool.
Yeah, it was fun. A lot of fun. Anyway, so that's sort of my story in a nutshell. That's how I started out. But I was being in the right place at the right time.
So, Kosh, what are you up to now in 2024? Are you working on any new projects at the moment?
I'm going to work on an exhibition about myself. I'm also working on. I've got some books to design. I've just done one on national parks, which turned out to be very, coffee table books, spectacular. I'm also doing one on the wine country here now, which is going to look probably very conservative because I can design. I can rock and roll, and I can be very conservative, and that might be very pretty. I can design that. So I'm still working, but I now pick and choose. I don't have to pay the rent desperately. See, that's one of the problems. You've got to remember that when I did Abbey Road, I'm not exactly sure how much money I made out of that, but I think I got paid something like £750, which is what, $1,200 for Abbey Road. And the check for a week for this one was signed by Paul and John, despite the fact they weren't supposed to be talking to each other. And I had to cash it. I had to cash a check signed by Paul and John, which would be worth how much today?
Oh man, yeah, I can't even imagine.
I had to pay the rent.
Oh, wow.
It's gone. So it's not, there's no good worrying about it, though I do. Not that I'm bitter.
Oh, but national parks, that is so awesome. I'm going to leave the link to that in the podcast description so everyone listening can go check it out and click on that link and it'll take them right there.
Yeah, because it's a great book. I love it. The photographs are spectacular. I've got an exhibition coming up at the Orange County Fair called The Art of Music, and then I got a sort of special spotlight on myself there, which is a good venue. I mean, they had 500,000 people walk through it last year, so it's going to about time I showed some of my other works, and just let you know that. It is, so I mean, pop in and see it.
And people can buy tickets for that too?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes, you can buy tickets, and they're selling vinyl there as well, because it's all about vinyl. So, which, as you know, is great resurgence of vinyl. Oh, back to the 12-inch square. Now you can see what you're doing. I'm fed up with 1.5-inch squares at sort of 72 dpi. Like,
Yeah, like what is that?
what is that? Oh,
Well, Kosh, thank you so much for coming on the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. It has been such a great time talking to you about your stories and about your albums and designs and everything. And just thank you for your time and thank you for coming on.
great. Thank you, man. Thank you for doing that. It was really cool. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning back into the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. I'm your host, Jack Lawless. You can check out all of Kosh's projects in the podcast description and find his social media links there as well. Thank you to Kosh for being so amazing as a human and as an artist, and for agreeing to being a guest on this podcast. Again, check out all of those links in the description. And now that we're back with new episodes, we will see you very soon with a new one.